Hi, it's Dave. Welcome. Today I'm joined by Amjad Masad. He is the CEO and founder of Repl.it. It's a fast-growing startup that's trying to democratize programming by allowing people to code and collaborate from the web browser. Welcome, Amjad.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, I'm super excited. I think you guys are at an intersection of so many interesting things in the world. You have software, coding, collaboration, education, remote work, technology. So many things are intersecting, and you guys are doing some really fascinating stuff trying to democratize programming. This is a huge historic trend, international, global trend. So I want to do a deep dive into your company, your product, your story, but also how you view the future, how you view technology and software playing out in the future. And I think this is going to help me and many others as well. So I wanted to kind of give you some time to kind of go over. Actually, before we do that, I wanted to just give a quick overview on Repl.it. Where are you guys based? How many employees do you have? And when did you guys get started?
Yeah, we just made a big announcement about going global, and we made it at two points with going global. One is we replicated our compute infrastructure throughout the world. Specifically excited about India and Asia, where we now have servers and people who are coding on Replit there actually have a much better performance now. And the other point that we made was that we're hiring globally. And we started like very much in San Francisco, and we're like very much everyone's on site, everyone's in the office. We had, we're doing the whole kind of startup like live at work, and like your life is your work, and we had a lot of fun doing that. And to be frank, it kind of that reduced delay and that high bandwidth communication makes it really easy for very early stage startups to get a lot done in a matter of year or two. But now we're hiring and scaling globally. We actually have team members in Europe, India, and Palestine, and of course in the U.S. across all the U.S. time zones. But we're only 22 people right now, 22 full time. We have a few interns at Replit. We always have interns, and I'm sure we'll get into that. But a lot of our audience, a lot of the people who are getting into Replit are actually the high school, college age kids, and we're discovering talent from our community, and we typically hire from our community, and that makes it extremely fun to always have users and developers that are building our platform are also working for us, and who's better to like invent the tools except the people that are using them, but we sort of like grown somewhat conservatively. I think you see a lot of startups grow much faster in terms of headcount. We never made headcount a goal. So we try to be as efficient as possible. 2016, 17, we're two people, the founders, me and Haya, actually she's my wife as well. And then we hired our first engineer, and then second engineer. 2018, we were four people. We got into YC. We raised our seed round from Andreessen Horowitz. I think at the time it was like total 6 million, the entire seed round. And in 2019, we were something like 8 people. 2020, 16 people. And so now we're 22 people. I think we're going to end the year with 32. I like the doubling year over year. So just makes it like a neat number. Eventually we'll go to infinity. But
Yeah.
we try to always focus our goals. Yeah, I think a lot of Silicon Valley companies kind of size each other up by how many people work at the
Mm.
company. And so we try to take a different approach, and like how many users are we serving, and like not expand headcount to the point that like you have so many people, and we're always kind of a little bit under resourced. And I think that's a good thing to kind of for a startup to have.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I mean, some of the fastest growing startups have had crazy amount of millions and millions of users per one engineer, served. Um, What is your current kind of user statistics? Like how many users are using your app right now, and how has growth been? How has it looked over the past I guess 4 or 5 years since you guys started?
Yeah, so it was a side project before that, so it
Okay.
goes a little bit before that, but growth been very consistent. When you're, building something a little bit more niche like a coding startup, you can't expect like social network type growth, right? But we've actually had a pretty decent growth for a startup that's targeting a niche like that, and we've been at least doubling year over year for the past few years, and now we have more than 6 million registered users, and that'll probably double as well. And we have millions of active users, um, and and a subset of them are also developing websites and apps that are hosted on Replit as well. And a lot of them, like a subset, but that non-significant subset, actually spend their lives on on the platform. Like maybe we can get into some of the stories there, but um, it's especially the younger folks are coding so much and learning so much and expanding their knowledge so much in building businesses. We've had 15-year-olds, 20-year-olds building businesses with thousands of dollars in MRR. And that's been incredibly exciting for us. A lot of people landed jobs and things like that.
Hmm. Where do you have any geographic breakdown of kind of where your users are located generally?
Yeah, so originally, like the U.S. was dominating by a lot, and then we see it's interesting. We see certain countries light up at the same time. So like I remember in 2017, we started seeing Europe coming on the map, and we literally see them on like Google Analytics. When we used to use that, we kind of ripped it off recently, but just because we don't want to track our users. We don't want Google to track our users, but we just see the map of like UK, then France, and you could see the kind of the dynamic of growth, and it was very interesting and very intriguing to see how that growth happened. Um, the strongest growth right now is coming from kind of more developing parts of the world right now. I think India is the strongest one, but we're seeing really strong growth in the Middle East and Africa as well.
Mm. Yeah, fascinating stuff. Um, let's see. I want to go ahead and dive into kind of what is Replit. Before we get started, for those who are listening who aren't into coding or software, could you explain kind of the concept of a REPL, and what that inspiration for your name and your product was?
Yeah. So back in school when I was going to study computer science, for every subject you had to install gigabytes of software, typically pretty crappy software to be honest, to start coding. So Java, you had to install NetBeans and what have you, and GTK and like all sorts of things like that, just to type a single line of code. However, there was prior art for programming environments that were lighter weight and that were interactive. So, typically you write, in, standard tooling, you write your software and then you compile it. And then after you compile it, you run it. And then, after you see the output, maybe you want to edit it again. And that cycle takes really long time because of the way the tool is built. The REPL, which stands for read eval print loop, is a more closed feedback loop between the human user and the computer, where the computer is sort of like reading what you're typing as you're typing it. So that's the read part, and then evaluating the commands that you're typing, printing the result. So read eval print, and then loop, get started again. And so you have this interactive session. It's almost, I like to describe it as a conversation with a computer. So you go from writing letters to the computer to having a conversation with the computer. So the old way of writing things is this like long form, write everything and then run it. Now it's like more interactive. And so that was the inspiration for what became eventually Repl.it.
Awesome. Can you go ahead and do a demo of kind of maybe what is Replit? I mean, what's cool about I think your product is it's almost kind of like you have to see it, you know, to to understand it. I'm going to go ahead and I'll switch to a screen share mode here, um, and we'll go ahead and yeah, your screen is up and your
Cool.
thumbnail's in the corner. Go for it.
So this is my Repl.it homepage, and from here I can create a REPL. And the way to think about a REPL, it's almost like your machine in the cloud. So I like JavaScript, so I'm gonna pick Node.js, and I'm gonna just like have the name that it gave me. It gave me this funny name, so I'm just gonna have that, and click Create REPL. And now I have a fully loaded machine in the cloud that I can code on. So it has this interactive element that we talked about here. I can give it commands like 1 + 1. What is 100 times 20? Give me a random number. So you're having that conversation that we talked about. But I can also here start writing the simplest program that a lot of kids like to write, which is, what is your name? That's the name, and then print that name. Print in JavaScript is console log. So we hit run. What is your name? My name is Amjad. And then you print the name. Maybe you want to say hello, name, hit run, Amjad. So I'm editing my code and using it as I'm editing. So that's the kind of fast feedback loop. And this is one of the innovations that we have. It just makes it a lot easier to learn and explore how coding works.
Cool. Could you actually continue to do some more lines of code? I think this is pretty cool.
Yeah, let's keep going. So maybe we want to build something that asks you for your name, and then maybe asks you for your last name, and then saves it in a cloud database. So let's say last name. So we said hello name, and then let's say like, what is your last name? And then we'll say hello, and then the first name, and then the last name, and hit run. And this is so we're constructing the program as we go. Now we have this really cool feature called database. And database, where traditionally, if you want to go to Amazon or Google and kind of provision a database, it'll take you hours, if not days. Here, Repl.it comes with a built-in database. So it even allows you to, it even writes the code for you in a way. So here it inserted the requirements for this thing. Here we're constructing a new database. And let's do set name, and the value is name plus space plus last. And then is what happens after that. So for now, I'm going to just run this code again. It installed the database. It knew what I wanted to do. And then we're back into the program. And now we have the name saved. And just to make sure, I'm just gonna delete this piece of code, and I'm gonna actually get the database, get the thing that I stored, and then here we're gonna console log the value. The value is Amjad Masad. So we remembered who you were. And from here on, I can sort of, I mean, maybe it's worth pausing here and like recognizing that you have provisioned a cloud machine, you have provisioned a database, and now you're writing and storing things in the database all in the cloud without leaving your browser window. I can take this URL and I can share it with a friend. And let's go back to the earlier code, and let's can you see my
Yeah.
incognito window?
Yes, I can. Yeah.
So now this is my user, can come into this REPL and can use the application that we built for them. So now I am going to be Joe. What is my last name? Rogan. Something went wrong here. Typically, what happens is we have an application. Sorry, I'm not sure what went wrong exactly here, but that's how demos worked.
Yeah.
Typically, we'll have it, that'll also run in the entire application and actually save the values. I actually think I know what happened here. Cool. So the program ran. I now create a program in the cloud and share it with someone else. They can react to it, they can comment on it, or they can even download it and play with it locally. Perhaps more interesting, as you become a little bit more advanced, you want to build a web app. You don't want just a command line application. So here I'm pulling up the Express example. Express is a JavaScript framework that allows us to build web applications. So here, the one unique thing about Repl.it is that it figured out that you wanted to install Express without you installing it. And so one innovation that we have at Repl.it is the environment figures out the intent of the user and does a lot of things for them automatically. So whereas previously you had to learn a lot of these tools, in this case, we automate the workflow for you so you can focus on your code and your code first. So at any moment now, it's going to open up the web page, and it should say, "Hello, Express app." So we have now an application that we're working in the cloud. I can also open this in a new tab, share it. Now we have an app accessible via URL in the cloud. If I go to this app here, you can see that's going to update that it's going to show the new Express app. So, the same app that you're sharing with people, it's going to update as you're updating that app. So that's also another thing that makes it super easy to ship applications on Repl.it, because you don't have to go through this laborious process of, updating, creating new versions, and so on and so forth. I can also use the database in this part of the app, but let me now showcase some of the multiplayer functionality. So I can share this. Say I can share this with Dave or someone else. Another thing I could do, I can invite people to this app. So say I'm just gonna invite myself in this case. So now I can see my cursor from the other web page right here, and I can see myself typing. And if I switch here, I can see the same. I can see the exact same. I can see the updates happen in real time. And on top of that, you can kind of realize that this kind of looks like Google Docs. What I can do is it can also add comments. So what does this comment do? If I switch to the other tab, we have this feature called Threads, and Threads shows you what the conversation that's happening inside your REPL. And here I can say, oh, I was just trying things out. And of course, you can see it in context here. I can resolve it. If I hit resolve, this comment is resolved. So this makes it super exciting and super easy to kind of collaborate with other people and build apps with others. Now, when I am done with my app, I can also share it to the Repl.it community. And the Repl.it community is actually, let me show you the landing page here. We have apps that are trending in the community. So we have this community space. Someone built an app, a Python game that they made, and people are commenting on this app. This game is fun. You can run this app in the community space. You can upvote it. You can react to it. We have a bunch of tutorials for people that are contributed by the community. You can learn Lua, for example, here, or a Python tutorial. We also have a bunch of templates, so you don't have to start from scratch. So, I can create a new REPL. I can say like personal blog site and create that. And now, with 2 clicks, I have a blog on the internet. So here I have an entry, and so I can say, "Hello, Dave, run," and this is a blog entry called "Hello, Dave," and you can do that for everything from e-commerce sites to games. We have a lot of different templates you can select from. Discord bots, people like Discord bots to automate things on their server. Slack bots. And maybe finally, just one thing for the more professional users out there, the set of collaboration tools that we built makes it really exciting to work within a team. So Teams is a new feature that we have. We have Teams for education. We have Teams for friends that are building things together. But we also have Teams for business that's still in alpha, but it's coming soon. So this is the Replit team that it's the team behind Replit. And actually, this is my my teammates, and I can see exactly what they're working on. So I can jump to my teammate Patrick, and this is live, so they might be doing something embarrassing. I hope they're not. Let me see if he's around. Hey, what up to? Let me run what he's up to. Oh, he's building the new Replit newsletter. That's pretty cool. I can kind of review it. I can leave a comment on it. I can just ask, is this newsletter in HTML? So like a legit question I might want to ask. Maybe he's not, he's busy or not around or on a different tab. Let me go to Connor here. This is what we use for user interviews. So he might be interviewing someone. So, for example, this is a user interview that some folks on the team done for Teams for Business, and I can and here this is a Markdown file. So Markdown is a markup type file that makes it easy to write content using plain text. And we use this to kind of write notes and collaborate on notes and send messages to each other. And so in this case, I'm reading the user interview that happened, and we like to use Replit as a way to share information internally. So this is another feature kind of for more business advanced developers. The platform is feature packed. I could spend hours and hours kind of describing some of the best features that we have, but maybe to summarize, if you can remember one thing, Replit makes it's the easiest place to start coding online. It's the easiest place to ship your app and share it with other people, and it's the easiest and the best place to collaborate with others.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Yeah, no, that was super helpful demo there. So Amjad, I'm wondering, let's try to bridge the gap here. For those experienced in software, they probably will look at this and understand what you're doing in terms of how you're simplifying, the programming environment and taking out the friction. But for those who, let's say, who aren't too familiar with what it takes to get started coding, can you explain kind of what your value proposition here is compared to, for example, setting up my own coding environments and all the plugins and all that extra stuff that goes into it? Like, what are you doing what are you offering, I guess, the end customer?
Yeah. So traditionally, say you want to code in Java. The first thing that you have to do is you have to download a compiler, a Java compiler and runtime. And that's actually an Oracle product. So you have to go to Oracle and download multiple gigabytes of Java. So now you have the system dependency for Java, and you have to install it. And by the way, if your platform is locked down, say at school, you need an IT administrator to help you do that. So it's not always the simplest. Now that you've downloaded the compiler, you need the IDE. IDE stands for Integrated Development Environment. So this is the editor and debugging tools that help you write the software. And so Java has a bunch of paid products that you can use, but there are a few products, say NetBeans. I used it in school. You go to the NetBeans site, it's an open source Java IDE. You download that. That's also multiple gigabytes of data. You download that, you install it on your machine. Let's say you're very smart and you figured out everything required to link your Java IDE to your Java compiler, and you start writing code. Now you've written code, you've iterated on your program like we just did, and you want to share it with a friend, you want to share it with your professor, you want to get feedback on it, you want to share it on the internet. What do you do? So maybe there are a lot of different sharing sites. So maybe GitHub is a sharing site. So you want to go use GitHub, and what GitHub is based on a tool called Git. So Git is a way of sharing and collaborating on software. So now you have to go learn Git, you have to download Git, you have to install Git, and then once you have Git locally in your machine, you can Git push to GitHub, and you kind of now move your software over to GitHub, and now you can share it. So what I just described, even the most proficient among us and the smartest will probably take multiple hours, if not days, to actually get. Uh, and with Replit, we actually make that entire process into seconds. So it's orders of magnitude better. It's 10, 100, 1,000x in some cases better than the current standard way of doing things. Now, your audience probably knows with any innovative kind of nascent technology, you have one axis where you're so much better at, but you have other areas where you're underdeveloped at. So, for example, for advanced software development, just to give you a balanced picture of like not Replit is not a place to replace all software just yet. We'll get there, but in some cases, I showed you how it's easy to share and live update software. In some cases, you want to introduce more tools like Git and other tools to make sure that you're pushing high quality software by doing code reviews, by having staging areas, and by introducing just more processes in order to ensure that the code that you're pushing is good. We're building a lot of that infrastructure out. We have a lot of it in experiments internally that we'll be releasing. But at the very least, if you're just starting with programming, it doesn't make sense to go through the pain that I described. Just go to Replit and start coding.
Yeah. I mean, it also seems like one of the things you're doing there is you're taking care of the hosting issue, right? So let's say I'm coding in my environment and, I run it on my local, machine. Now I need to find a place to host this, but then,
Right.
I push it, but then also it's like I need to find a place to host a database, but I have to learn about, how to deploy and manage an online database, which is a whole nother thing. But you're doing that just all within the browser. And so, I mean, it seems like a lot of this stuff, you have this empathy, it feels like, to the user. You're trying to make it easier, right? Where does this come from? Kind of this idea of trying to make it easier, taking out the friction, making coding kind of perhaps what coding ought to be, and not dealing with all the extra stuff that comes along with it.
Yeah. Yeah, just to show your point, can I share my
Let's go
screen
for it.
again? Yeah. So a lot of the things so this is our blog application. It has edit on Replit here. Our blog is actually is written in Node.js and hosted in Replit. You can see the real
Nice.
live logs that are happening here. Some people actually send messages to our logs. They discovered that and they've been playing with it. And like we give feedback to each other on our blog. and we kind of write blogs together. So we collaboratively are building our blog. That's just one example of something that's running in production. So you can see the domain is even linked here. And it's fully in the browser. We never touched any AWS or Google Cloud or Azure for this app. It was totally developed from scratch on Repl.it and uses all the Repl.it goodness. So this
Cool.
is one example
With
of like
with
a
your
production.
yeah, with your blog, are you guys using a database there or just putting blog posts into files?
Yeah, in this case, the blog posts are into files,
Okay.
but it uses database for analytics and things like that.
Okay. Got it. Yeah. I mean, I know, like, for example, let's say a person is trying to kind of fork or hack or play around with, let's say, a website, or let's say a GitHub project. So you're browsing and you're wanting to download this GitHub project, but then it's not as easy as it sounds sometimes, because you download the code, you might run it on your server, but let's say you want to run it for other people to experiment. You have to find some place to host it. You have to set up all the database, stuff, all the third-party plugins, and then run this app. But this could take days, if not weeks, to set this up.
Yeah,
It's not as easy as just click. I'm like, but it seems like that's a whole different paradigm on what Replit's doing. Is you're like, hey, here's a project. Instead of downloading a GitHub project and going through all this hassle, you just right there can just fork it, play around with it, change it, share it, and all of the hosting, all of the database management, all that stuff is you guys are taking care of. I mean, is that kind of where you guys are? I mean, is that kind of part of the appeal? I'm guessing, right?
yeah, it's totally part of the appeal. It's the initial value prop, like we're talking about. It's the initial core value prop, and that's why teachers are excited about Replit. That's why students are excited about Replit. That's why people who are just getting into programming are excited about Replit, because we take care of all that stuff. Um, where that empathy comes from. You know, I talked a little bit about when I was going to school and running into all these problems, and that partly, it just felt kind of insane to me that, in Arabic, I'm not sure if it's in English, we have the saying, um, "The shoemaker walks barefoot." And what that means is sometimes the folks that are responsible for making something or inventing something usually ignore themselves. So software engineers build a lot of the amazing things that we're everything, like all the software is built by software engineers. Google Docs is in the browser, uh, everything's in the cloud, except for software engineering. That's madness, right? Like, why? And you start asking that question, why? You quickly realize it's a collection of both hard problems and cultural issues and dogma. Um, so on the dogma side, one of the things that I ran into when I started to try to solve this problem was that, hey, like, no real software engineer codes in the browser. There's the, like, the your engineer's engineer, and like you have to go through the pain in order to kind of realize the title of an engineer. And that's totally crazy to me. And the reason I think it's crazy and like we should do better is because I think there's right now a software priesthood, right? So there's like this, we're on Silicon Valley, we're making all the software, and all other parts of the world, they're consuming our software, and it's totally centralized. And the reason I call it priesthood is because a lot of ways we are gatekeeping. We're not making it easy for people to get into programming. So some of the kind of experience there, actually, the creator of Git, someone asked him, why didn't you? So the creator of Git is also the creator of Linux. So he's an amazing guy. He like, he changed the world and he's great. But I'll just to show you some of the, like, how these folks, how we think as an industry. Um, Someone asked him, like, why didn't you write Git in C++? He's like, I wrote it in C because I want all the C++ idiots to not contribute to Git. And so, every software engineer, every language on the continuum of like language purity. So like you have the C and the like maybe the Haskell and things like that. They look down on the folks that are like maybe just starting out or using a higher level language, and it goes all the way. And that's part of the dogma that I kind of faced early on as this kind of gatekeeping, and I felt like that's a bad reason. One, two, software has to be democratized. Like everything in history of technology goes through these phases of having this priesthood. Like reading and writing literally was in the priesthood, right? In medieval Europe, if you wanted to read the Bible, you have to go to the priest because he can only read, like he can't read, right? When the printing press came out, it sort of democratized access to books, and in a couple of hundred years, you went from single digit percent literacy to almost complete literacy. And I think the same thing will happen in software, where we're going from a place where less than 1% know how code works to probably a high percentage of the world that actually know how to, at least if not writing code day to day, actually know how code works, know how software works. And there's a lot of important benefits that come from that. So when people learned how to read and write, we had things like the scientific revolution. We had things like the industrial revolution. We had things like liberal democracy. All these things are downstream from literacy. In my opinion, a lot of people concur. A lot of philosophers and scientists kind of believe the same. It's almost hard to imagine what the world would look like when we have more software competency in the world. I think it's going to be hugely positive for economic growth and for just societal welfare.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, interesting. When I look at some of the examples and what you showed here, one thing that strikes me is like if I'm starting out with coding, I can get something up so fast, right, through Repl.it, meaning I get a URL it's a published website just within a minute, basically, right? And any of the changes can just be instantly just deployed. The combination, I guess, of ease of use, but also, it's hosted in the cloud. You've got, database managed, you got all this other stuff. And it's interesting because it feels like there's a couple ways of learning coding. Like it feels like there's a traditional approach, kind of institutional approach, where people sit you down and then they teach you from a high level, or they teach you all the basics theoretically, right? And then there's another approach, which is more like you just go into some type of piece of code, and you hack it. You basically change different lines of code, see what it's going to do, try to force something, make it do something different. And from what I've seen is for people, and especially young people who learn how to code this hacking way, they seem to have a different kind of connection with code, like it's much more functional, versus this more theoretical, approach. Like, what's your experience with code? Did your experience learning how to program and code affect or impact kind of your approach with Repl.it at all?
Yeah, 100%. When how I learned to code was by myself. Back in Amman, Jordan, when I was 6 years old. My father, who actually didn't have a lot of money, but was really into science and technology. So he actually took a loan and bought a computer really early on in 1993. And I was just enamored by this machine. Actually, one of my earliest memories is of computers. And I remember kind of as he was using the computer, as he was unboxing it and plugging it in, and his friend was showing him kind of DOS commands, so cd, mkdir, ls, whatever, just creating files and what have you. I would like look behind their shoulders and kind of try to learn. And then at night, after they leave, I would go boot up the computer again and try some of the things that I learned just by looking at them and kind of play around with it. And I didn't know what I was doing, but I just kept trying, and some things kind of worked. And after a while, kind of my parents tell me that I became so good at computers that I actually, was installing software, writing software, and even took apart the hardware and put it back together again. And so in my earliest memories in my childhood, learn by hacking is how I learned programming, and I think how everyone should learn programming. It's the most natural way. I think there's this, that comes from math, this idea of, theory first, because math is this thing that's not instantiated in the world. Math is you're in the, world of ideals, like I think Plato talked about. Whereas programming, you're actually doing something tangible in the world. Although it has its roots in programming, in math, it is an entirely new thing. And so when this new thing was happening, people did not understand it, and they try to cast it in terms that we use for math. Um, and by the way, even math, it's better to teach it as a project-based approach, not entirely hacking, but Seymour Papert is one of the thinkers around education, computer science, and programming that I really look up to. And he was at MIT Media Lab. They invented Logo. Logo was the first programming environment for kids, and Logo actually was born out of the need to teach mathematics. So they thought that teaching mathematics in the way you were describing, the theory first, was not the best approach. And Seymour Papert was not interested in teaching programming, but he was interested in teaching programming as a way to learn mathematics. And so Logo is a turtle that you program it that kind of creates shapes like a circle. And he thought, like, if you can write a program to create a circle, then you really understand a circle, what a circle is and what it feels like. And that was his approach. And I think, that's the approach that we should teach everything, but most importantly, programming as this experiential kind of fast feedback loop cycle. It's been with me since the start. So not only with my work on Replit, but when I went to work at Facebook, in 2013, Facebook was really hot place to work in terms of the technical invention that were happening there. So they had just released React. React is a new way of programming UI. It's actually an amazing invention that makes programming UI really easy. And when I joined Facebook, and I was really attracted to kind of Android development, because I felt like Android is one of those platforms that's gonna have the most amount of users, because iPhone was inaccessible to people, and I really like technologies that are more accessible to more people. And Facebook was investing in Internet.org and just like spreading technology and smartphone access and internet access throughout the world. We can criticize them for a lot of the things that they've done since then, but one thing that I think they had a good idea about, I don't think they've achieved it, is this idea of internet.org, of like basic universal internet and computing access. So I was attracted to that. And what I found pretty quickly when I was messing around with Android at Facebook was the programming environments for Android. They were Java. They followed this slow development cycle that I talked about earlier. So what I got really excited about is like, can we apply this like fast loop interactivity, the REPL style, into mobile development? So at Facebook, I joined a group that was working on bringing React to native devices, Android and iPhone, and so that's what we did. We worked on React Native. I was one of the early engineers on that team, and React Native now is the world's top cross-platform development environment for mobile devices of all kinds, and it has that interactive feedback loop. So it's really kind of, I feel like it's the best way to learn, and it's the best way to build. And that's what we're trying to bring to the world with Replit is, you can learn to build, and you can build to learn.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, you were at Facebook, what, 2013 to 16, was it?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. I remember that time with React. Facebook, it was really, at the center of mobile development at that time, really pushing that through. Um, yeah, I mean, it reminds me a little bit about music. I mean, do you play any musical instruments by chance, or?
No, but I
Mm,
read this book about music and programming.
okay.
Um, that really really inspired me. I think it was called The Passionate Programmer, and he was writing from the perspective of a musician, and he talked a lot about improvisation, and that reminded me of that like feedback loop. But I'd love to
Yeah.
hear how you're thinking
Yeah,
about it.
yeah. Because like I learned piano um, through kind of Suzuki theory method, and I hated it. I just hated just the theory of Suzuki. And later on, in high school, I had a friend who just could improvise. He would hear songs and just play them, and just like make up stuff. And I was like so fascinated by how you could do that. So he taught me kind of the basics of chords and how to, improvise and all this stuff. And it completely changed my whole view of music. And with my kids, one of the things I have ages 3 and 6, two kids. But one of the things I do is I make music like really, like I'm trying to, rather than theory, like I try to play around with it. So I'll play a song with them, and then I'll just like change the words, or I'll change the feel. I go, watch this. I'm gonna make it more more sleepy or more scary, or I'll change the mood, and I'll just do these slight adjustments to different songs or different things where they're just fascinated by music. They'll sit there and just say, okay, what's next, how can we change the music this way. And I feel like that type of curiosity to see someone able to change something and elicit certain emotions, out of people, and that whole experience, like that's developing that hunger and that understanding of the potential of music. In a similar way with programming, it's like you come to programming and it's sterile. It's just theoretic theories and numbers and just, different lines of commands you need to learn, and you don't understand like, why do I need to do this, right? But when you see the power of code to create stuff out of thin air, to create interactions and give information and to collaborate and do all sorts of stuff, then you start to see like, oh my gosh, this is like incredible. And when you see like you could actually change each line and each section of code does different things, and it has function and power, it completely changes the appreciation, of code, and it gives you that motivation behind it, to do something with it. But I just noticed that that connection in the sense that it feels like, the whole theory of Replit is like, a experience, dive into it, hack it, learn it. Here's a bunch of examples, and have fun with it. Yeah, it's fascinating. I think with my kids, I think, if they want to um, learn coding, which my 6-year-old already has a lot of interest in computers. He's like designing actually like different screens. It's like he has like 50 designs of all these computer screens. I'm great, but yeah, it seems like it's a fascinating way to learn. It's something I wish I would have had as a kid, to learn programming.
Yeah,
Yeah.
can I show you a programming environment we're making for kids?
Yeah. Oh, awesome. Yeah, I'd be totally
Yeah.
fascinated by it. Yeah, sure. Let's go for it.
So this is not yet launched. So this is a new programming environment we're building for kids. This is a game we call like Flappy Mark. So it's like Flappy Bird, but this character called Mark.
Hmm.
This makes the programming environment is different in that you can actually you have this like image drawer. So let me change Mark to green and hit run again, and now I have Mark in green. Let me I can I have sounds here. I can also um, pause the game. I can also like make it go slow. I can show, I can debug it and kind of show it really easily. I also have, we have this concept of scenes. So the first scene is this core scene, and the syntax is very easy. So to add this character Mark, you just do add, you reference the sprite Mark, you add the scale, you add the position for it, and then to animate it, we have this thing called mark.action. So every time the game loop happens, you run this function, and we have really nice easy functions like wave to make it kind of uh, do this pulsing thing, and then we add the score right here, and I can change any part of it. So I can say score, run that again. Uh, Let me go back to our. So now we have score. So it's pretty easy, interactive, kind of REPL style. So here it says key press space, go to main. So main is the main scene. So this is where actually most of the games happened. And I'm not going to go through the code, but it's like 120 lines of code, and you can create something like Flappy Birds.
Wow,
And it
awesome.
has really nice functions and easy things like collides and hit and things like that.
Hmm. Awesome, man. Yeah, yeah, that sounds pretty crazy. Pretty cool to be able to hack that code, as a kid, just to see what happens when you change different things, and um,
Yeah.
yeah, it's
And just to react to like what you said, I think there's something quite natural about you have a 3 and 6 year old, I have a 1 year old, so I've had the privilege that last year to kind of watch him in his very early stages. And one thing you quickly realize is the world is their REPL in a way, right? They're interacting with the world and they're learning as they're going. Every step of the way, they are experiencing the world, and that's how they're learning. In AI, and I know you've done some videos on AI, but there's this AI technique called reinforcement learning. So the idea that you have an agent and they do an action in the world, and then the world represents some data or some feedback, and then the agent learns and then does the next action given the thing that they learned. And I think really humans learn that way as well. And a lot of AI is inspired by humans because this is the most intelligent being we know. Um, and you see it in kids all the time. Most of the learning is experiential, is actually touching things and hitting things and doing things and saying things and seeing their parents react to this, or doing an action and seeing the feedback from the parents to them. So that's really the basics of learning. Yet when we go to school, we change the paradigm entirely. It becomes this oral thing, and you know. I'm not entirely sure where that comes from, but like the
yeah.
way you describe you're teaching your kids music, is that incredibly exciting to like change one thing, and seeing the result is like, oh, like I can do that too. Like you immediately think, okay, I can do that too. That was easy. And then, okay, what else can I do? What else can I change? And it becomes this process where you're following your curiosity. And I think that really what we need to, as society as a whole, we need to inspire in children.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think part of the truest learning is this hands-on, and the freedom to be able to make mistakes and to just correct and to change things. And a kid naturally, I don't think they're scared to make mistakes. They're just learning. That curiosity is so strong. I think something about our education system, it's like it becomes this top down, compliance, like you obey it, just listen to what we have to say, you have to memorize what we tell you. And it becomes this like, it seems very much in conflict with this natural hands-on curiosity of just building and learning. And it seems what's one of the things that's fascinating about Replit is it does seem to be coming from this more bottoms up approach, where it's not this top authoritarian, organization or place saying this is how you're going to learn it, these are the steps and this is how it has to be. Rather, you're giving the tools, you're creating the playground, for people to learn, not just kids, but anyone who wants to learn how to code. Yeah, it's definitely fascinating stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I think bottom up is the way to go in a lot of things. From a business perspective, from a learning perspective, from change perspective. Hierarchy is, of course, important and serves a role, but the hierarchy's role is to enforce order, and order is important for society, but also it stifles innovation. The reason why innovation tend to happen from weird places, right? The reason Silicon Valley emerged in San Francisco Bay Area 1970s, LSD culture, it's pretty weird. Like, the top industry in the world came from LSD culture, right? I mean, Steve Jobs went to India and dropped LSD for months before he started Apple. Um, it's because you know, industries and technologies and societies organize in a way to create order. And by creating order, they start maybe as incomplete thoughts and experimentation, but once they grow, they calcify and they become harder to change. And then change has to come from somewhere else. Now, Silicon Valley is now calcified, I think, and change is increasingly coming from somewhere else. So if you think about, what is the most disruptive technology in the past decade, it's Bitcoin, it's crypto. And where did Bitcoin come from? Nobody knows. I think the best way to describe it came from the internet, right? Satoshi is a citizen of the internet, or they are. And Satoshi is giving Silicon Valley a run for the money, right? I mean, Silicon Valley is still going to make a lot of money from Satoshi's inventions via Coinbase and other things like that. And everyone in Silicon Valley holds some kind of crypto, um, but it's a huge blow to the Silicon Valley community. Maybe a wake up call that, hey, you know. Maybe we're not the epicenter anymore, and maybe the internet is now a new community, a new country, as it were.
Yeah, I mean, that's actually a fascinating insight there because, it feels like there's a element of rebelliousness, kind of counterculturalism that's needed to kind of create just the next big, generational, change, and that's what Silicon Valley had, and it does seem like a bit that is changing. It feels like Silicon Valley has this pride of we're the best, we're the smartest, the most able or capable, but it doesn't seem like they have the complete edge or, of course, monopoly on this rebellious side anymore. It doesn't feel like that value is there, as it was maybe 30 years ago. And I mean, it reminds me of kind of this crisis that I kind of see coming where you have, kids go through the education system, they go to college, they're the perfect students, they've obeyed and learned everything that, the school has taught them to do, but they graduate and they're like, what do they do? Like no one's telling them what to do anymore. And they don't have the skill set or that the drive to really create on their own. They're just passive. There's this passive, you know, generation that's been just educated and they're taught to believe and they put their trust in the system. And after they get out of the system, they'll realize, you know, yeah, the system wasn't, you know, doing, I think, stuff in their best interest. You know, it was doing it the best interest of the system. You know, it's easiest to tell students to obey, be quiet, just, you know, learn what we tell you to do because it's easiest to manage them. It doesn't mean that that's what they need, you know, when they graduate, when they leave the system. But yeah, it's definitely a lot of interesting stuff.
At some point, it was rational to do so, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the boomer, maybe up to Gen X, it was rational to follow the rails that are set up for you, right? So you go through life and you do what you're supposed to do, and you graduate. And well, first of all, you don't have a huge debt. You know, college was not as expensive as it is today. And you know, we had a lot of space for all sorts of professions. The growth in mid-century America, at least, was was impressive. That like everyone had a path in life towards the American dream, and you know, it was rational to do that. And you know, you join a company like IBM and you spend 30 years there and you go up the corporate ladder and you end up with a very good retirement. You end up with a home, you end up you know, with a car and a home and a family, and it was a good life. But it was a small period in the history of humanity that had happened, right? And yeah, you know, people talk about, you know, what happened, like why, you know, why is it not the same anymore? And the reality, you need to actually flip the question. What had happened in the like 1950s to 70s, 80s that made it so that, you know, this type of lifestyle is possible? Because the rest of human history wasn't the case, right? You had to strive and you had to go out of the system and you had to kind of work really hard and you had to be inventive and creative in order to make something out of yourself and your family. So now we're actually back to the mean in a way, right? Where you need to chart your own path. And parents still do not understand that. So we had this issue a few days ago, actually a week ago, on Twitter. A parent, God bless his heart, I have nothing against him, but he seems like a great guy, wants the best for his children. He went on Twitter and he said that Replit is a brainwashing machine for teen coders. That's the quote. It turns out he's really angry that his son is spending time coding on Replit instead of preparing for the IIT exam. So IIT is the MIT or Harvard of India. It's incredibly impossible to get into it. It's a very good school, you know, nothing against it. I think it's commendable for anyone to try to get into it. But the kid didn't want to go into it. The kid had a really good coding streak. He built an OS on Replit. He built a programming language on Replit. He could get a job anywhere. Facebook would hire him tomorrow. And he just didn't want to go into IIT. And his father blamed it on his, you know, addiction to coding. And so he went on Twitter and he said that. And then some other Indian parent tagged me and said, you have to make a statement on that. So I made a statement. I said, like, Replit teen coders, don't spend all your time coding. Make sure you graduate with good grades. And what had happened is, turned out I you know, touched a very sensitive topic in Indian culture. A debate that's happening where you have the new generation of entrepreneurs and programmers and hackers that are almost rebelling against their parents who are you know, applying a lot of stress to, you know, to make them go into schools and traditional paths like IIT. And a lot of people said, no, you shouldn't say that. Let the kid code. Let him invent his own path and his own future. And that's just one example of, you know, how the new generation of hackers and entrepreneurs, like you said, are, you know, part of a new counterculture. I think in this case it's different than Silicon Valley in a way because it's global. And it's I think the first time the frontier is the internet. The frontier is virtual. It's not actually a geographic area. And I think that's going to be really exciting for the next 10 years. I think we're entering the golden age of the cloud, of the internet, because you're going to see this decentralization of innovation throughout the entire world.
Do you think, you grew up in Jordan, is that correct?
Yeah.
Do you think growing up in Jordan has helped you to see more globally than perhaps if you would have just grown up in Silicon Valley? Does it help you maybe have more empathy to, people with slower internet or with different, opportunity access to opportunities? And does that kind of, how does that, I think, impact, your view of Replit going forward?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think not only because we grew up in Jordan, but I think so. My father's family is from Palestine, and they fled the 1967 war with Israel, um, or maybe it was the 48. So they left in one of those wars. They left to Syria first, um, and I think it was 67. They left to Syria, and uh, my father grew up in Syria, and then went to Jordan, where they were trying to create a life for themselves. There are a lot of people still stuck in Syria, by the way, from 48 and 67, that Palestinians that actually don't have like a national identity anywhere. And on my mother's side, they fled the Algerian war with the French Algeria war in Algeria. She's originally from Algeria, and they went to Syria as well. And then from Syria, they also immigrated to Jordan. And my mother and father met in Jordan, so they're both refugee immigrants. And Jordan, gave us a safe place. It's an island of stability amongst a sea of chaos. And I couldn't be more thankful for Jordan and the life it gave us, and the king and the stability there. It's we couldn't be more grateful for that. But at the same time, we always felt like my brothers and I a little bit alienated from any geographic area, because also folks in Jordan, especially on the younger side, they also there's also a little bit of like native versus immigrant everywhere in the world. It's kind of like that. So you had to experience like some bullying and some feeling of, oh, I don't have rights to this land, it's not mine. What land is actually yours? And we didn't feel as much affinity to anywhere else, because they tell us stories about Palestine, but we never could visit Palestine. And um, so it did feel like the internet was, and this global worldview did feel like something you could belong to, and I could relate to a programmer in the United States or Egypt or anywhere else more than I could relate to like some people in my class. And um, and so I think that gave me that kind of worldview, like this like global worldview, and affinity to groups and people that kind of think like me and are excited by the same things that I am excited by, but that are not necessarily tied to any geographic area.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I know, yeah, I've actually visited, Jordan and Syria and many other countries, in the region. And it does, I think, in some ways, even though the world has become more connected, it also seems like there's a level of where the world is a little bit more segregated in a sense, where it feels like the lifestyles and the cultures of certain areas or countries in the world and the way people are brought up and living, it just feels like um, um, that people in a sense are just like we're connected to all this global internet, but I don't know, it feels like there's a disconnect to different cultures sometimes and countries, and it just feels like I notice sometimes for me international travel, living abroad, kind of opens my eyes to this world is much bigger, than just one country. Especially, I think the U.S. has this kind of more narrow mindedness of just like US is the whole world almost. That's sometimes I get that feeling, but when I hear about Replit and like India, I just like immediately like, knowing India, I just feel like, oh my gosh, that like it's gonna catch on fire. It just feels like that's like one of the it just matches so many things, about that geography. But yeah, definitely. I'm curious, if Replit was hugely successful in the next 10 years beyond your wildest dreams, what would happen? Like, what would be the scenario? What impact would your company, your product have, you think, in people's lives or in the world?
I think a lot more people will have access to cloud computing in general. So if you couple kind of something like Replit, where you get a computer in milliseconds, right, in the cloud, you get infinity of them. Every Replit is a computer, and people are using Replit as just generic cloud computing. Teachers are using it as a file sharing tools. Some people are using it as a productivity tool, and with the apps that you could build on it, it's just an extensible, system that you can build on top of. And coupled with things like Starlink, where basically we're going to blanket the Earth with internet, so everyone will have access to internet, and then everyone will have access to Replit, and everyone will have command over the cloud. And for one, I think a lot more people will be writing software for their individual use cases and for their community. So I think you're going to see, in a way, we're talking a lot about global, but I think you're going to see, in a way, or also more local software, right? Right now, everyone is like buying software from Silicon Valley, but a lot of things could be written that is like more geographically relevant to the group of people and more localized to their needs and use cases. So you're going to see a lot more of that, a lot of like personal community-based software. I think education will be, like we talked about, will be mostly interactive. I think a lot of things will be learned through computers and programming, even subjects that we don't necessarily think about in that way. You mentioned music, and I think biology, chemistry, physics, all of that will have some interactive component where kids are actually kind of building models and either using software or the real world to be able to learn these kind of things. I think information sharing will just become ubiquitous. It's going to be very easy to kind of share a file with anyone, anywhere, hop on a collaborative session. Like, all software will be written collaborative in real time with anyone in the world. I think we're also going to see collaboration across people in different time zones and different geographies. And I think we're going to see a lot more early entrepreneurship. So we're going to see kids at 13, 14, 15 building businesses. We're probably going to see the first like $1 billion, 13-year-old business, kind of like what we're seeing with YouTube. You have like 7-year-old millionaires now, and we're going to see that with software as well. And I think as part of all of that, I think wealth will decentralize throughout the world. We're working right now with a startup called Manara, whose like mission to connect talents in places like Gaza with companies in the U.S. And they placed 7 people at Google, right, working from Gaza. at Google, and that's kind of crazy. So you're going to see a lot more of that, especially with Replit, where it's pretty easy to onboard anyone onto your company. So you're going to see remote work kind of become really mainstream, and it's going to be easy to kind of find people to build software for you. So even people who don't know how to code or don't want to code, they can, there's going to be a bigger, more active market for software contractors, and it's pretty easy to kind of contract people to build software for you. So again, this idea of like democratized software creation. Um, and I think that will have a significant impact on wealth. And I think, more people will exit poverty and will have the means to change their lives and have the tools to build a better life. Um, Kind of like from a platform perspective, we're going to see a new way of building software as well. Like we're already seeing this idea of like remix culture. I think you can think about Replit as similar to TikTok. On TikTok, you go to the site and you see a video and you react to it or you remix it pretty easily from your phone. I think also we're going to see a suite of software tools that you can go to Replit and you can one-click remix and edit and make it yours. And we're gonna see this like new wave collaborative software making where it's like based on forks and remix of forks and remix, and and that's gonna be pretty exciting. Also, I think it's gonna be a lot easier to like monetize your software. It's gonna be easier to monetize your infrastructure. I think we're gonna see people kind of spin up, databases or um, authentication systems or crypto or what have you on top of Replit, and other developers will be able to use them. So you have this, tight feedback loop between infrastructure companies and developers. Um, and and yeah, I think software will continue to get easier to make, and I think people will be making it from their phones.
Hmm. Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I think you mentioned Starlink. I think that's going to be crazy. I mean, this is going to get high-speed internet access to the most rural population of the whole world. Combine that with all the tools that the internet brings, including, let's say, Replit, but also all the tools that people need to build a business too. And they're just getting easier and better. You get Stripe in the mix, and you get other stuff, and you just you just have like everything you need to do international business.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm wondering, you talk about wealth, kind of the impact on wealth. So, lots of people getting out of poverty, learning skills, finding, probably large markets, etc. What would you say to those who might have the critique that, well, it will benefit certain people who are more techie or more, let's say, wanting to code and to get into that field, but then it won't benefit. It'll be adversely effective, impactful to those who aren't in those fields. So, in other words, will the wealth gap actually increase over time because, software and tech is eating up all the wealth? And if you choose not to go in that field, or if it's just less tech, right? You're not exposed to that wealth and that type of, wealth generation that, let's say, software and tech does. So basically, our programmer is going to take up all the world, eat up all the world, and our companies that are software focused, tech focused, so much AI focused, are they the big winners and not everyone else? Or can it be decentralized somehow? Is there a way? Is there optimism to be had where somehow this stuff will be distributed and somehow we'll have all tides rising?
Um, I think it's easy to have this mental model or dichotomy today of tech versus non-tech companies, but I think it's an outdated model of the world because I think software is in everything, and so in a sense, everything is a tech company, and in another sense, nothing is a tech company, right? Um, like, why is Airbnb a tech company? Why is it considered a tech company? Because they use software, but they're a hotel business. And in the same way, Uber and other things. I think the reason why certain companies were considered tech companies is because software is pretty hard to build, right? So Uber had to invent logistics software in order to build a taxi company. But in the future, where maybe logistics software, you would have a library on npm to build a logistics company, or you have an infrastructure as a service or an API, then anyone can build that kind of thing. You'll still have some more value accrue in the platforms, but I think even the platforms have this decentralizing aspect of them. So yes, YouTube itself makes a lot of money, but the YouTube creators makes a lot more make really a lot more money. And like, I'm not sure exactly what the stats are, but like Apple probably like pays developers. um, I'm not sure if they make more than the developers or developers as a whole. Like, so platforms generally like create more wealth than they capture themselves, and so they kind of decentralize wealth in that aspect. Um, and so in the future, I think that dichotomy will increasingly subside, and we'll see software as part of everything. Look, in the same way that um, that if you look at the again, like last century America or the century before that, when steel was considered a technology, like steel mills were considered advanced technology. They were high tech, right? Right now, we don't consider them high tech. We consider them like low tech industrial infrastructure technology, right? And we don't even say they're technology. Like, when you say tech today, you mean software, but tech, it used to mean steel, and before that, tech used to mean um, trade even, and so technology keeps changing because technology is whatever makes us do more with less. I think as software gets democratized and gets into everything, then it's um, then we'll change how we talk about things. But there'll probably be a new frontier for tech, a new frontier for making, building something and getting rich quick and like accumulating more and more wealth, and that's not a terrible thing, because if you think at wealth as wealth creation, that means it's like not a zero sum game, right? You're creating wealth, you're making things better, you're generating a lot of wealth, and you're capturing some of it. In that sense, you're making humanity as a whole better, and you're capturing some of that wealth. Um, but there is a type of wealth capture that is not productive. And you typically see that in governments and maybe some old financial institutions, where they're not doing productive work, and they're just and maybe old technology companies where they're focused on policies, and they're focused on regulatory capture, and that's, I think, that form of like non-productive wealth capture is the bad thing. I think if we're creating a lot of wealth and some people are getting really rich, I don't think it's bad, as long as there's equal access to everyone, for everyone to do that. But I think the kind of wealth capture that we need to pay attention to is the kind. And by the way, that kind is what we talked about, is the calcification and the lack of dynamism in certain industries as they grow and become more traditional. They kind of fall prey to that sort of capture.
What would you say? What would you say? I mean, along those lines, let's say we bring up AI, and we say, okay, the next 10 years, 15 years, let's say as AI gets more mature, it starts to, and let's say hypothetically, there's certain companies that just excel in AI, and the founders and the investors reap a lot of that wealth creation, that those companies, let's say, create. And in turn, these companies disrupt, and AI disrupts a lot of jobs that people had that AI is taking over. Let's say it's a truck driver, or let's say it's a retail clerk, or let's say even it's an accountant, or even, people, there's so many, like, it's almost endless, the jobs that AI eventually could disrupt. So you have this dual factor where you have wealth creation AI is creating, but it's being captured by mostly the investors, let's say, and the owners. And then you have this disruptive factor, where jobs are being disrupted.
Yeah, I have
Yeah,
some thoughts.
yeah. What are your thoughts?
Um, do you know this job called knocker upper?
No, no.
So knocker upper, he's like a human alarm clock. So you used to pay this guy, and he would come and he'd have a stick and he would knock on your window at a certain time as a way of an alarm clock, right? Back in Jordan, we had someone in Ramadan that comes with with a huge kind of drum and kind of wake people up to eat a little bit of food before kind of sunrise, where you start fasting. And so you had these jobs of people that were waking people up. It was an industry of waking up people, right? And then you had the alarm clock, and the alarm clock disrupted the waker uppers or knocker uppers. Um, and if you're living in that, your view is that, holy shit, like all these people are losing their jobs. It's a catastrophe. Now, the alarm clock industry ended up generating orders of magnitude more jobs than the sort of knocker upper industry. And and you see that story. You had the Luddites who were going around and like knocking out like looming machines that were creating clothes, automating the creation of clothes. You definitely have a lot more people in the clothing industry now than when you had during the Luddite era. So you see it played out in history, where there's a disruption that happens, but it ends up creating more jobs and more wealth than before. Now, the collateral damage, which is the people that built deep expertise in an area that, by no fault of their own, uh, becomes irrelevant, and that's tragic. That's pure tragedy. And this is where philanthropy, maybe some government intervention comes in, and just as a society, like, we need to take care of these people. Like, it's not their fault at all. Like, they did all the rational things, and they built an expertise, they built a life, they built all of that, and a new technology emerged and made their jobs irrelevant, and that's tragedy. And in the long term, the point that I'm making is that it's better for everyone, better for humanity. In the short term, there's going to be some damage, and the way you fix that, by re-education, by some form of safety net, philanthropy, and things like that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's it's an interesting, kind of dilemma, because if you were to follow, let's say, the tech exuberance and optimism, let's say 20, 25 years ago, when the internet was sprouting, that the whole idea was this is going to lift everyone's boat. Everyone's going to benefit from the internet and the computer revolutions, and it seemed quite obvious. But we come to 2021, and it seems like there is a large class, and largely a lower class, or lower to lower mid class, middle class, that feels ostracized, that feels abandoned from the system, in a sense. Like, they don't live near the Bay Area or urban center. They don't, work for a tech company. They're not invested in the stock market, etc. And their incomes have just totally been, stalled, and it's difficult for them to find work and to find any upward mobility. And it's almost becoming in the U.S. A national crisis in a way, right? We have kind of this political divide and contention, and it's something that wasn't, I think, forecasted 20, 25 years ago. Like, we thought, the whole tech industry thought that everything would be, would solve itself, or everyone's would benefit. I'm just curious, as tech perhaps this pace of innovation, as it perhaps could increase with, let's say AI and all this stuff. Like, do you have, like, what's your kind of root of optimism that it won't worsen, that we won't have a larger lower to middle class who's getting more ostracized, who's getting more frustrated? Is the hope, do we just need to educate more of our younger generation, teach them the skills, open up new opportunities, or is it a safety net, government intervention, some type of support, or what's your kind of take on it?
A dear friend of mine, Douglas Rushkoff, who's like a media theorist, as they call them, he coined the term, I think, viral, and he's like one of the early like cyberpunk people. And he wrote a book. He wrote a few books that I'm a fan of. Like, one of them is called "Program or Be Programmed," where he talks about you either learn the skill of programming or you're going to be programmed. So basically, like, we're being programmed by social media companies to consume more ads and this like Skinnerian fashion. And his point was, if you learn programming, you know that there are people that are building programs to get you addicted to certain behaviors. And then he wrote another book called "Throwing Rocks at the Google Bus." And so, this Bay Area controversy where San Francisco natives were, getting priced out of their homes, and they looking at something to blame. They found the tech guys with their hoodies and their phones and their whatever, waiting for their air conditioned bus to go to their campus where they had free lunch, and you had these like native city folks uh, feeling envious, and blaming them for the changes that are happening in San Francisco. So they started throwing rocks at the Google bus. And in the book, he talks about a lot of these issues. He arrives at different conclusions that I would arrive at, but I think you're absolutely right, and I do agree that the the there was this vision of computers as freedom machines. Instead, we arrived at more of there's this film producer who produced films like Brazil and Terry Gilliam. I think Monty Python, Terry Gilliam or Gilliam, something like that. And a big part of his themes in the movies, 12 Monkeys. I'm sure a lot of people have watched these things. Is this a huge techno bureaucratic operations that are basically corporation slash government kind of all tied together, and like are restricting people freedom in kind of as opposed to an Orwellian way and a kind of Brave New World type of way where they're getting us kind of addicted on TV and Soma and certain technologies. And so, you had these two visions of the world, right? You had the kind of, Silicon Valley LSD culture, computers as freedom machines, and you had this bureaucratic computer AI communist, corporatist system. I think we're a little bit more on the communist machine than we are on the kind of pro freedom machine. And I think Replit exists to shift a little bit back towards individual empowerment. You mentioned companies like Stripe and other companies here that allow you um, to create things and give you the tools to the everyday person to improve their life. And I have the optimism that I have is because I see entrepreneurs every day thinking about this problem and recognizing this problem and trying to build tools not for the enterprise to get them more power, but for the everyday person. At Replit, we made a conscious decision to go after the hobbyists, to go support educators, to go support individual people and small teams. And we left kind of like millions of dollars on the table that if we could have gone into enterprise. Now we think in the long term that has trillions of dollars impact in terms of total wealth created. But in the short term, like we could have been a much more kind of profitable, faster growing company if we went and applied the tools that we built to enterprise. But instead, we want to support people. And the reason I'm optimistic is because I'm working on this, and I have to be optimistic because that's what we're trying to achieve. And the other thing is, I see a lot of entrepreneurs that are recognizing this problem and are trying to go after it.
Yeah, got it. Are you kind of is your focus more on the hobbyist, the learner, the small company, the indie developer, or just is it more geared toward that, or do you guys have ambitions with the enterprise field as well? Is it just a little bit later on?
Yeah, we do have ambitions there. They're actually knocking on our door quite a bit, and we're probably going to release a business plan soon. Where we're going to put our foot down is that we're not going to implement all their pet features and go down the rabbit hole of a lot of issues in the enterprise market. So if it's a revenue stream that is congruent with our vision, then why not? And I think it is. So we'll probably go into that. And at the end of the day, like the everyday worker at these companies deserve to get good tools, and we want to do that.
You had a tweet not too long ago, I think a month ago. You said our most direct competitors are Roblox and Minecraft. Few understand this. What do you mean by that?
So I think Roblox is going IPO tomorrow or today.
Today, yeah, actually, yeah,
Today,
today, yeah.
And if you look at Roblox, it's quite fantastic. Like you have developers again making millions of dollars. A lot of them are teenagers, and they're kind of in the same space and vision that I'm talking about. They're giving tools to, and the reason kids matter is because if you build for kids, then you sort of build for you. Then your tool is approachable. They're a good litmus test for that, and so Roblox did that and scaled that, and now they have an ecosystem where anyone can build software and sell it quite easily. Now it's limited to games, and I think Replit can be a lot bigger because we're not limited to games. You can build anything on Replit. So in that regard, Roblox is similar to Replit and Minecraft in the creation aspect. Another reason they're potential competitors is because the Replit programmer sits down on their computer and they have limited sort of time and attention span and energy, and they could either spend it playing games or making and learning how to make software on Replit. So in that way, we're competing for attention with them. So this is two ways we're competing with them that is more direct than when people ask us how do you compete with Microsoft, right? I mean, yes, in some sense we compete with Microsoft, but it does feel a little bit further away than Roblox and Minecraft.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. I wanted to ask you about your Y Combinator experience. For those who don't know, Y Combinator is this, kind of the Harvard of Silicon Valley incubators of the world's incubators. But I've been a big, Hacker News reader and fan for many, many, many years, um, and I've read all of Paul Graham's essays. Um, I'm curious, like you guys entered the Y Combinator program. It was it 2018 or so?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
and
2018.
I noticed it was after three failed attempts where you guys
Yep.
applied and you didn't get in. You were saying how the first time where you had a meeting super early on where a Y Combinator partner was saying that your product is just kind of like a toy, right? And you should maybe join something else. Um, it's interesting because like a lot of times the ethos of Paul Graham is and Y Combinator is the most successful things appear like a toy in the beginning. You know, um, can you comment or just kind of share your whole idea? Was it a struggle? Like, did you have struggles where you're like, am I building just a toy, or did you have this faith confidence that no, this is something that might look like a toy, but it's going to be really, really huge, has
Yeah.
huge potential?
Yeah. I think like just one comment on YC partners, like, there are a lot of them and not all of them think alike. And the other thing is that there are concepts that are hard. Even when you think you know them, you still make mistakes around them, right? So one concept that your audience knows is compounding, right? So compounding is like I can explain compounding in a couple of sentences, but nobody builds good intuition on compounding. And when we were kind of raising some money for Replit early on, and we had this strong kind of like month over month and year over year growth, but it wasn't the same amount that you would see from Facebook, right? But they didn't kind of project forward that like we're gonna have 6, 7, 8 million users in the future because we were in the like hundreds of thousands. So they didn't understand that compounding aspect. And investors, their whole purpose in life to understand compounding, and yet they were still kind of misled by the small base. Um, and so that's one aspect. The principle you're talking about, which I think Peter Thiel came up with, and I think Paul Graham expounded on, is this idea of good ideas exist at the intersection of things that look like toys, but have a potential huge market. Um, and so, like one example of that is PCs. Like early Apple looked like a toy. It was only used in education and by teenagers, and it ended up being a huge company. Microsoft's first product was BASIC. BASIC was a toy programming language, and ended up being a huge company. And so, people have missed out on that. Investors have missed out on that a whole lot of time, and it's actually there's theory behind it. It's Clay Christensen's innovator's dilemma. The Clay Christensen's kind of formulation is from the perspective of an executive. The executive is doing everything right. They're serving their customers. They're listening to their customers, yet they fail. Nokia CEO, when they failed, he said something, we did everything right, but we failed, right? And the same thing is what Christensen describes, is that the counterintuitive nature of disruption is that you wouldn't notice it until it is actually threatening to you, until it's too late. And the reason is because technologies early on look like toys, but have a huge potential to overtake the upper market. And like Christensen's book talks about not only technology industry, but talks about steel mills, actually talks about mini mills and how they disrupted really big mills. And so it's an interesting read for folks who are interested in that kind of stuff. Now, as for our experience with YC and Paul Graham, of course, Paul Graham was hugely influential for us. I mean, he wrote the essays on Lisp. Lisp is a programming language that invented the concept of a REPL. So I kind of learned about this kind of stuff from him. So in a way, Replit was should have been the quintessential YC company. They should have really got us accepted us from the first time we applied. But it took Paul Graham to discover us on Hacker News so that he actually pulled some strings in YC to get us in.
Yeah, I read your blog post about that. So uh, Paul Graham, after you guys get rejected a few times, Paul Graham notices you on Hacker News. He asks Sam Altman, right, now of OpenAI, to meet with you. So you meet with him, and you're surprised that Sam Altman is getting everything that you're talking about, right, like on a very detailed level. And then you correspond with Paul Graham, the founder of Y Combinator, through a few months of emails. And one thing that struck out was saying, you were saying, like Paul Graham was saying, no, like focus on kind of your core user. Like, what was that? What was your situation? Were you kind of a bit divided, kind of wanting to go multiple markets, and did that advice help you to kind of
Yeah.
focus?
Yeah. So like you said, like you asked me like what gave you confidence throughout this time. And the answer is like yes, you have this strong conviction because of this idea of democratizing programming, but every step in the way people give you doubt. You try to hire people, they say like, what are you doing? Like you should go to an enterprise market. You go try to raise money, they tell you the same thing. You try to, even explain to friends, like some of my best friends didn't get it and thought that I was wasting my life. And so at some point that kind of doubt gets into you and maybe changes your plans a little bit. Um, I think one thing that was going for me is that I had multiple successes based on the same hypothesis and same kind of generator function. Um, so Code Academy, I'm not sure if I mentioned that, but I was, founding engineer there. Now Code Academy is doing $100 million ARR, doubling year over year. Coursera just filed the S1, I think at a $5 billion valuation, which much slower growth rate. And so you could tell that Code Academy is doing really well. Um, and React Native became, the top mobile development framework in the world. So basically, everything I worked on had gone on to have a huge impact. And so when I went into Replit, I already had that confidence of like, okay, I need to kind of follow through with my passion because I know what I'm doing and maybe the world is wrong, right? And so you had that like chip on your shoulder type mentality in order to kind of go in to the fight and like despite what everyone says, you gotta keep going. But Paul Graham was hugely influential because what he noticed was our core audience was these teenager crowd, and he said, look, like every major computing platform in the world, be it PC, web, and what have you, had started with their core audience being the teenagers that are coming up, the future programmers and entrepreneurs. If you build for that audience and if you grow in that audience, in 10 years you're going to be the default computing platform. And that kind of stuck with me because it kind of validated a lot of the way we're doing things. It also mapped very well on what we're talking about in terms of disruption theory and things like that. And it was more fun. Like, we wanted to build things differently. We don't want to go to, like I said, to enterprise market, and then your roadmap is dominated by your sales department, not by the hacker or not by the developer that you're building for. And that gave us a lot more confidence. And of course, Paul Graham kind of opened a lot more doors for us. And so that certainly was a great experience.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. You've noticed, or you've said in the past that you want to make cloud as easy as you've made coding. So you want to make, deploying to the cloud using, I guess, cloud services, storing, accessing the cloud, etc., easy. When I hear that, I think of Heroku, where Heroku is just in the past 10 years, just an amazing platform that allowed so many people to more easily get on the cloud. Like at our company, it's been a lifesaver. We're deploying to Heroku saves us a lot of time, even though there's still a lot to do. Do you see yourselves, like your company, competing with Heroku at all down in the future?
Yeah, I mean, I think we already do. I mean, right now, I used to, when I have an app idea or internal tool I want to build, I open up my editor and type it out and run it, and then deploy it to Heroku, push it to Heroku. Instead, now I open Replit and it's instantly in the cloud. I don't even have to deploy it to remove that step. Heroku is model was something hugely innovative at the time, but I think it's now outdated. And I think Replit is really the new model for the cloud, as opposed to having. I wrote this article a few days ago. It's called "On Hosting from Your Editor," and I talk about this. This bifurcation that happens when you're hosting on something like Heroku. So you have your editor, you're typing your editor, you're seeing your creation come to life, and then after you've done that, you push it onto GitHub for storage, and then you push it onto Heroku for deployment. But the moment you did that, you create this distance between you and your creation. It becomes harder to maintain, harder to debug, so on and so forth. With Replit, we collapse all that into a single interface. So where you type your code is where your thing is being hosted. And that has a lot of downstream benefits. It has some disadvantages right now. We're fixing those things. But I recommend everyone, if your instinct is to like go deploy to Heroku, try building on a Replit, and I think you'll find a world of difference.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. I think my main concern or question would be like on Heroku, I'm able to access so many third party, plugins and services, whether it's Elasticsearch or, you know, Amazon S3 or just, Mongo and just different databases and different services. And like, we probably use probably like 15, or so of these plugins in our company. Do you have a roadmap where you guys are going to be adding more and more kind of connecting services and things to your platform?
Yeah, so the first phase of Replit was about removing that setup, right? So we did that. We did this idea of like don't set up and just get started immediately. The second phase was about removing that hurdle from deployment. So you wrote your code, it's already deployed. That's it. I think the third phase is now about, okay, I've used these basic tools for building something. Now I have customers, I have scalability issues, I have I want to grow my app. I have multiple apps. I want to connect them together. So, what are the set of abstractions and tools and utilities that allow you to do that? And I think this is where you can't build everything. And this is where you'd want to open up for the community to start building infrastructure and plugins for you, and hopefully make it very profitable for them to do so as well. So I think that's definitely on the roadmap. It's probably not this year, but next year that'll be available.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, I mean, do you ever, like in developing new features, do you ever just like come alongside maybe some like developer or person who's really utilizing your platform but can't maximize it? They're frustrated in certain areas, and do you come alongside them and say, okay, what are your biggest areas of frustration? We want to solve them, or do you do more of like a more general approach where you're just taking feedback from a lot of people and kind of taking the most
Both.
popular features?
Yeah. Yeah, both. You want high bandwidth feedback, and you want fast feedback across a large population of people. So you kind of want to like look at the data, look at the metrics, but they don't tell the full story. And then you kind of drill down and really talk to people. There isn't a day, at most a week that goes by when I'm not talking to users, right? So we have a Discord server. I'm hanging out with them. They're on Twitter. They're tweeting at me, messaging me. They're in my email. Um, my co-founder Haya is a designer, and her whole thing was talking to people. Like that's her superpower, right? She listens very well, and that's what she does. And she instilled that in the DNA of our culture and our company. And so we're all about talking to users, and we have different ways of talking to users. Sometimes it's surveys, Sometimes it's like one-on-one conversations, but you got to do all of that.
Yeah, interesting. Uh, Final topic is how is it working with your wife as a co-founder? Like, for example, um, my actually for me, I actually co-founded my company back in 2008 with my wife as a co-founder.
Oh wow, I didn't
Yeah,
know that.
and it was it just seemed like a little bit of a strange kind of out of the box thing. It seems like there would be some prejudices against that, you know, from typical investors and people. How have you navigated that? Like when you look back, what are the pros and cons? How has it been helpful? How has it been challenging?
Yeah, there's definitely prejudices that we've run into. But I mean, you look at Y Combinator. The founders are Paul and Jessica. They're married, and it's becoming more and more natural, even fashionable in some cases to do so. Um, Especially when something is your life's work, right? Like with Paul and Y Combinator and us and Replit, it's been with us since the start, and this is what we're working on. It just makes sense to be part of our lives, and that makes it easy to be more and more invested in this thing. Um, and The thing that I tell new entrepreneurs all the time is that don't fall into the sort of the pageant show for investors. Don't try to change yourself or your company in order to look more attractive to investors. Um, Sadly, most investors are followers. They follow trends. Whatever is fashionable is fashionable. And like, YC had its share of dogma as much as anyone else. They normalized a lot of things, but they also, had this dogma against solo founders, and between Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and these folks, like there's a lot of really successful solo founders in the world, right? So investors, even the most enlightened of them, have dogmas and have things that blinds them. Peter Thiel opens his book Zero to One with this phrase, I think from Tolstoy or something like that, that all good families are alike, but dysfunctional families are dysfunctional in their own ways, or something like that. And then he extrapolates that to startups and basically says that there was only one Zuckerberg. The next Zuckerberg is not going to start a social network at Harvard. There was only one Jack Dorsey. The next Jack Dorsey wouldn't be starting Twitter in San Francisco. And basically, I think maybe Pierre Thiel figured it out, but I think he at least articulated the idea that like entrepreneurship is these like black swan events in the words of Nassim Taleb. It's the every iconic company is born in a very different way in a very different set of circumstances, and the culture around Silicon Valley is one of pattern matching, and you basically sort of pattern match to look like Zuck, to look like whomever. And my view has been like, I'm me, and we are we, and even if it's tough, we'll just tough it out, and we'll not change who we are to in order to look good in front of investors.
Hmm. Makes sense. Has COVID at all changed your attitude toward like being stationary in, let's say, San Francisco or the Bay Area versus, you know, I'm guessing is your team working remotely mostly right now? Yeah.
Yeah. We
Okay.
still have our SF office. People
Okay.
go there to hang out and eat food and things like that. But work is happening online. I think work will happen online. I think you're going to have all these different models for work, but ultimately work is in the cloud, right? I mean, part of the reason why we have offices is because we had to be co-located with our paperwork. Now our paperwork is in the cloud, and to co-locate in the cloud, right? That's the kind of the future.
Awesome.
Um, and and How COVID changed how we view the world. uh, continuing on the Peter Thiel kind of quotes, he had this quote recently where he said, 2021 is the first year of the 21st century. And I thought that was on point. Take my father again. As I said, my father is very interested in science and technology and has been for a long time. But even him, he tells me in 2020, I learned so much about computers, the internet, and the cloud more than the entire last decade together. So he learned how to get more productive with the cloud more than an entire decade in a matter of months. And COVID is this narrow passage that we're passing through that will transform how we work forever, or at least for centuries. And so it's sad, tragic event, but I think it's going to be looked back on um, as the event that made the internet, uh, the way where work happens.
Hmm. Makes sense. Amjad, I want to thank you for a fascinating conversation across many, many topics, and it's been great. Yeah, I love this stuff. I mean, just the intersection of so many different fields, and the future is so open. And people like you with Replit are definitely shaping the future, and it's exciting to learn about what you're doing. So thank you for your time. Where can people follow you and find you online?
I am on Twitter and most other places as A Masad, Amasad. And on Twitter, you can also find my email, my bio, my link to my website. And yeah, you give me a shout out. I try to read everything and even respond to a lot of it. And again, yeah, thank you for this, Dave. It's rare that you get to discuss like these wide range of
Yeah.
topics, and have someone like you who has deep interest in every one of them. So I'm so happy to be on here.
Awesome. And I'll go ahead and link to Replit's website so you guys can try out the service and start coding. Yeah, it'd be awesome. All right. Thank you. Amjad, we'll see you.
Thanks.
All right.